Okay, good afternoon, Dr. Doyle.
Yes, hello, good morning.
Hello, oh, good morning there. Yeah, sorry.
It is.
Hi, Kevin.
Yeah.
Hi, Udi. Hi, Udi. How are you?
Good.
Yeah. The program will commence in a moment, 3 minutes ahead, but we are still waiting for more participants. We'll start at 2 o'clock. Okay.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Okay. So how's the weather there, Kevin?
Yeah, it's quite warm.
Warm.
It's the morning time and it's still dark. So it's night.
Winter time, I know.
Is it winter?
Autumn, late autumn.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
In Indonesia, it's very hot.
What is the temperature today?
37 degrees Celsius, Google says.
Google knows everything.
Yeah.
Including qualitative research, Kevin.
Yeah, sounds lovely. I'd say it's probably about 7 degrees here.
7 degrees.
7 degrees.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah, it's actually not so bad.
Yeah, not too cold.
Yeah, it's degrees of badness, I suppose, when it comes to the weather.
And it's at 8 o'clock, right? Morning time.
Yes, it's a minute to 8 here. That's right.
Okay.
So I'm in my home office. I am.
Oh yeah.
Hope you don't mind.
So how about the conditions there now? In Indonesia, it's quite normal, I guess. Yeah, it's better now.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the cases are still quite high here. But Ireland is reopened with COVID, and they're looking at a different metric now. Now it's, I suppose, because so many people are vaccinated, they're looking at the survival rate. I suppose that's how things have changed now. And yeah, I mean, almost everything is back to normal. Almost.
Oh, great.
Yeah, great.
But again, cases are still quite high, so infection. And I suppose that brings in the question then of, okay, you may survive COVID, but what about long COVID? Things like that.
Still unpredictable.
Longer term effects of the illness. Yeah.
The case here in Indonesia is lowering down this time, but again, as I said, we never know what happens.
We never know.
Yeah.
I think that's what the WHO are warning about. This virus won't do what you want it to do. It does what it wants to do.
Yeah.
Be still very careful.
Right.
It's 2 o'clock. Yeah.
Yeah, it's 2 o'clock, and then I think more participants are joining. More than 42. I think we expect to have more than 100, right?
More than 100. Yeah.
Hopefully joining. Yeah. So Budina, yes, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Pak Udi Samahudi. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dina Rachmawati. I'm the Master of Ceremony and the moderator of this program today. I happily welcome all the participants to the second short course series program held by International Office of Untirta, or we call it Pelilta. Pelilta proudly present this program for the students of Untirta and its faculty members as one of our strategies to expose all the academic communities of Untirta with English exposures, since this program is consistently and fully carried out in English. This program also shows Pelilta's commitment to offer enrichment and empowerment program to all the academics communities of Untirta. And for your information, this first short course series was held in March to April 2001, presenting 5 speakers from different institutions who delivered 5 different topics on research in social science. And in this second short course series, Pelilta invites 3 distinguished speakers from 3 different universities. The first, Dr. Kevin Doyle from Dublin City University, UK, Vera Symasi, Ph.D. from Sampoerna University, Indonesia, and Murti Ayu Wijayanti from Universitas Sultan Ageng Tirtayasa, who will present and discuss about qualitative research methodology. For today, Dr. Doyle will present about qualitative research paradigm, and you will have 45 minutes for presentations. And after that, we are going to have questions and answer sessions for 10 minutes. Without further ado, let's call Dr. Kevin Doyle.
Thank you. good afternoon and good morning from Ireland, where I am currently. Yes, I'll introduce myself. My name is Kevin Doyle, and I'm based at Dublin City University in Dublin, which is not part of the UK anymore.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah.
Thankfully, we gained our independence.
Yeah, Irish, yeah.
There's part of the island still is, and but that's a different story. But yeah, so this morning I'm going to really make the case for qualitative research, and basically talk about the value of qualitative research, and then give some examples of how I conducted my own qualitative research in a country in Southeast Asia, which might be familiar to you. I did my research in Cambodia, and I've also conducted research in Myanmar as well. So I'll have some examples from that, but primarily I'll be talking about my research in Cambodia. So I'll share my screen, and I have a PowerPoint presentation through which you'll be able to follow along as I give my presentation. Let's see, share this screen. There we go. One moment. You should be able to see that. That's a PowerPoint presentation. Oh, wait. I just want to put the full screen. Okay, you can that screen is clear to you. There should be a dual screen, a small image of me, and you can see the main screen there. Okay, so the case for qualitative research. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. That's the qualitative approach to research. 1 second, I just need to change this setting here so I can see myself. No. Yes. So qualitative research, it's funny how I came to qualitative research, because when I started my own PhD research, my own doctoral research, I knew I was going to use qualitative research, but I thought I would also include quantitative research, because the area I was looking at was social media communications technology. And I thought I would be doing a mix of both quantitative and qualitative. And I'll now describe to you how I kind of came to being fully qualitative in my research. Again, just to describe qualitative research for some of you who are not familiar with this approach, it's multifaceted. The approach is to investigate culture, society, and behavior through analysis and synthesis of people's words and actions. Unlike quantitative approaches, it does not try to transform verbal symbols into numerical ones. The data remains at the level of words, either the researcher's participants' own words, the words written in documents, or the words used by researchers themselves, herself or himself. And they do this to describe their activities, images, and the environments observed. And that's taken from a very good book by Hogan, Doyle, and Donnie, the Irish researchers. So quantitative versus qualitative. This is just a very brief introduction to the differences. I'm sure you're all very familiar with the differences yourself, but let's just kind of situate where we are at. And because so much of history, particularly in the social sciences, there was an awful lot of focus on quantitative methods and approaches. And often, the insights that came purely from quantitative often didn't answer many of the questions that they sought to answer. They were inconclusive. And in fact, we all know now, no one method is conclusive. The ability to count things does not make them more real, more precise, or more accurate. Counting is just one means by which we as human beings make sense of the world. Often we need to understand action and strategy from the perspectives of the actors and thinkers. Again, this is taken from the same book I've just referred to. And this focus here on the perspectives of the actors and thinkers involved, this is at the very core of qualitative research. People act and think through language, the social symbols that are passed on and extended from one generation to the next. And so it is sometimes more appropriate and more appropriate, more realistic and precise to explain social actions in terms of verbal symbols. Basically how people make sense of the world themselves. This is not to make the case that one method is better than the other, but one is more appropriate than the other, depending on your focus of research. So if we want to look at there's a spectrum here of thought when it comes to qualitative research. And you can see it goes from the purely subjectivist to the objectivist. and there's a broad expanse here of ontological and epistemological assumptions. And this is a really great kind of visual introduction to the differences, different methodological approaches, the different epistemological stances and ontological assumptions that underpin the quantitative and the qualitative. The qualitative is here on the left-hand side, and how we see the world, our ontological assumptions about the world, how we understand the nature of knowledge, that is, the epistemological stance that we have. And you can see the difference there between, the positivist, objectivist, rationalist science approach on the right-hand side, and the more qualitative, subjectivist, phenomenological insights almost on the far left. And this is where, and qualitative research fits in, more to the left, definitely not to the right, but at different levels of assumption depending on your own kind of ontological and epistemological stance when it comes to qualitative research. So if you read across, you can see the differences. So look at the research methods on the very bottom line there. So on the far left, we have an exploration of pure subjectivity. And this comes under, such, schools of thought as hermeneutics, symbolic analysis, contextual analysis. And then you move across to the more more objectivist approach, the historical analysis, then lab experiments and surveys. And, you come back to some favorite metaphors. This is quite interesting. There's kind of the idea of qualitative research being transcendental as against the more positive as being more machine orientated. The construction of a positivist science versus a phenomenological insight into how people see the world. So it's the difference really between, consciousness and being versus man as a responder. The difference between the kind of the machine and the spirit, reality is a projection of human imagination versus reality as a concrete structure. These are the two schools of thought. And so qualitative is more on the left-hand side, more about the subjective experience of life, that reality is a construct constructed by the individual, how they see the world themselves, rather than reality existing independent of the individual. So again, as I said, when I started my research, I understood I would approach the study of a technology. I thought I'd probably have to approach it from a quantitative perspective, because at that time, big data, this is a couple of years ago, big data was very current. Most of the research on social media was about network analysis primarily, and we was talking about the power of big data, what big data, the insights it could reveal to us. I wasn't, to be honest, 100% convinced by this idea that big data had the answers to everything, that big data had this power of prediction, and another thing as well, I wasn't a computer scientist. So I was coming to this research of a communications technology, and I was not a computer scientist. So even if I wanted to take the approach of a big data approach, I did not have the programming or scientific skills to be able to do that myself. I would have needed a computer scientist, or I would have had to spend the next couple of years, rather than doing my research on a technology, I probably would have to spend a couple of years trying to become a data scientist to then fit my research through the data science frame of understanding. So I started to look into how I could understand the technology, and through a qualitative approach. And I did eventually, because I actually discovered the value and the power of qualitative research. And I say that my research adopted a qualitative approach to understand the use and cultural meaning of social media in authoritarian contexts. This is not to say big data doesn't provide insights. It does, but it doesn't provide all the insights all the time that are necessary for everyone's understanding of human processes. And I want to understand how people use social media and the use they made and the meanings associated with their use of social media. And again, and also it's important as well, because qualitative research is more appropriate in particular contexts. And My research took place in Cambodia, which is an authoritarian, which is under an authoritarian government. So, you know, the context was important for how I was going to do my research. So I make the case here for, I'm not the only one making the case for qualitative analysis of technology. So Brabham argues that big data does not necessarily yield big insights. And he kind of says there's a reliance on the convenience of big data sets, big numbers, you know, beautiful graphs, do kind of project an authority because it's numbers and graphs, and it looks, this must be authoritative. It looks authoritative. There are numbers and figures. As he says, but the reliance on the convenience of big data sets whose size alone appears to confer relevance may lead to naive conclusions regarding the meaning of interactions, engagements, and endorsements. And, you know, the case is made, you know, that big data delivered Brexit, the use of it. But there was also the case that if big data was so insightful and we can know so much about the world through big data, how come no one predicted the Brexit election, that Brexit would go for the Leave campaign in the UK? Came as a complete surprise to everyone. Big data had been there for a very long time, but it didn't give us such an insight. And then again, the Trump election in the US as well. Again, a huge surprise to everyone. Again, big data not providing us answers or insights or predictions such as this. So a qualitative approach seeks to understand how social contexts and relations influence the participation, for me, of social media users in online as well as offline social activities. Even though today my research is about an information and communication technology, qualitative research can be used across all areas of the social sciences, that, you know, which is the area I'm in, from education, medicine, as well as psychology, economics. Qualitative research has an application in all these areas. So even if I today am talking about social media and information and communication technology, you can switch out that word, social media, and put in, you know, education. You can put in psychology, because you get these applications of qualitative analysis that I'll be talking about now, methods as well, do have application in these fields. Again, there's, you know, this kind of adoption of qualitative approaches to technology is, you know, there's one area here is called ethnography, which is, it borrows from ethnography in the study of social media and information and communication technology. Again, this is just an example of how qualitative approaches to research have been taken into the study of a technology. And again, this is all as well about, I'll look at those questions too when you have them. So yes, and again, this is about, you know, how you see communication. Qualitative studies and theories of communication see communication not as a mechanical process, but as a human process involving people and individuals. Communication is about the negotiation of meaning rather than the control of meaning, which is important when you come to your understanding of what is the most appropriate method of research. If I see communication as a negotiation of meaning, well, then qualitative approaches are much more appropriate for the deep understanding of the negotiation of communication and meaning. So scholars such as Van Dijk, Moscow, Hamida, Fuchs argue for qualitative methods as a means to delve more deeply into the relationship between society, people, and technology in order to arrive at nuanced understandings of motives and relations of power. And this is what qualitative research is really good at doing, is really understanding motives and relations, you know, between people and society, you know, kind of the personal and the structural. You get down to the, you know, what was motivational for certain decisions and understandings. To attain a deep, nuanced, and insightful understanding of phenomenon society, it was crucial to pursue a qualitative approach. And I wanted this understanding. To achieve this deep level of understanding, 3 data collection methods were employed. I used 3 methods, and I'll explain this in a minute. There's many methods that you can use in qualitative research. And in fact, one way, there's an argument that qualitative research is too subjective, that it's not scientific enough, that it's all about just interpretation of the researcher. So one way that qualitative researchers can overcome such criticism is that we use more than one method in our qualitative approach. We use more than one qualitative method of research. This is called, and I'll explain this in a minute, it's called triangulation of our data, which proves that not just one method gave us our insights and our explanations and our understandings, but 2, 3, 4 different methods combined together provided the insights we came to. Now, I used 3 methods primarily, and a 4th, but I'll explain the 3 here now as a way of explaining how qualitative methods can reinforce each other and then reinforce our results in our research. So what I did was I used in-depth interviewing, and interviewing is probably the most foundational method in qualitative research. It's one probably used by most researchers. Qualitative researchers, we actually go and talk to the people involved. I undertook 2 field work periods in 2017 and 18. I also engaged in implemented a diary keeping exercise, which I really want to talk about because this is very useful. And I think it's a much overlooked method in qualitative research, the keeping of diaries, having your research participants keep diaries of their activities. And I also then conducted a focus group discussion, which is a different level as well. I'll explain the different levels of qualitative methods and why they provide different answers and why the different methods and different levels come together in a triangulation of data, which is very valuable for doing qualitative research, and which then counters any criticism that we're not scientific and we're too subjective in our approaches to research. And also on a 4th level, I also analysed qualitatively the social media activity of 4 senior political figures in Cambodia. So I interviewed at different levels: ordinary people, elites, and then also the activity of political elites on social media to understand the whole kind of terrain and ecosystem of social media in Cambodia, where I was based, did my research. So we need to focus on, this is the important thing with qualitative research, we're focusing on how people make sense of their actions and the world. And this involves speaking directly with people about how they see the world, their reflections on their beliefs, practices, and meanings in the context of their lives and wider society. And Mills, Bonner, and Francis propose that attaining an objective truth is an impossibility, though it is possible to strive to attain the most sophisticated and informed construction of the lived experiences of research participants through qualitative methods of research and analysis. And this is important because context matters when it comes to your research, and particularly context when you're living in parts of the world that are, have different conditions, different difficulties, different considerations. Each country, each society, each city, different communities have different pressures, different conditions under which you'll do your research. And you'll find that maybe qualitative research is the most appropriate depending on the community you're working with. And Limapatong argues that a qualitative researcher requires cultural sensitivity and specific cultural knowledge of the community to be studied. And qualitative methods are the best suited to such contexts owing to their flexible and interpretive approach. And also because there's potential negative impacts of when you do research, because there's always a power differential between the researcher and the researched. Now that can never be really totally overcome, but qualitative methods do allow us to incorporate in these, certain ethical considerations in cross-cultural settings, where there are complicated historical, political, social, and cultural agendas may be present. Again, the qualitative research allows us to respond to these considerations. And again, this is crucial in exploring. And I want to kind of segue off here a little bit to explain context and why it's important, because context can often define the responses you get back from research participants, again, depending on the community that they're in, depending on the social, cultural, political context in which they're situated. it may impinge on your research. And this was particularly the case when I was doing research in Cambodia, and also to a degree in Myanmar too. And therefore I had to understand the context better. And for that, I got great understanding from James C. Scott. And he, of course, has done great research in Southeast Asia in exploring the practices and forms of what he calls everyday resistance in authoritarian states. What was important about Scott is that he demonstrates how subordinate populations in authoritarian societies often appear quiescent under repressive conditions, and yet maintain repertoires of resistance that often go unnoticed, as observers are too focused on identifying large-scale exhibitions of political resistance and spectacle. Everyday forms of resistance are surreptitious and gradual, yet they have the potential to be what he describes as effective weapons of the weak, which have undermining and subversive character, and that can have outcomes that are very gradual, that may even go unacknowledged, but it can have outsized influence on society itself. But the thing is about forms of everyday resistance, they're often not recognized for what they are and often go ignored. But what's important about this idea of subordinate groups in society is that they act differently. And particularly in authoritarian countries such as Cambodia and Myanmar, resistance of authoritarian regimes involves what Scott describes as the prosaic means of everyday class struggle in situations where openly defined powerful increments could invite actual danger. In societies such as this, it's dangerous to have a voice, to stand out. Therefore, the weak, the subordinate, they develop their own means of resistance that are designed to not draw attention to their actions, their meanings, their beliefs, their feelings about these things. So this surreptitious resistance is designed to be overlooked and to be misrecognized by the powerful, who are always sensitive to expressions of opposition to their authority, to their power. So when the weak are aware of the dangers in society, that they're aware that they're being surveilled, and they fear for their sanctions, the effects it may have on their lives, their economic outcomes, educational opportunities, all these sorts of things. The weak develop what's called a tactical wisdom. They move slowly in their forms of everyday resistance, and this form of resistance is marked by disguise and anonymity, meaning they disguise their true feelings and beliefs. And therefore, when it comes to research, when people have this public persona versus a private interior life under authoritarian conditions in what I'm particularly talking about, it's very hard to get down to that level of real truthful meaning and beliefs. Therefore, qualitative approaches which focus on the individual, which move more slowly, which involve engagement with individuals over longer periods of time, allow you to get down to that level of what I'm not going to call it truth, but more honesty than the surface level on which people, the public personas, which are important for people to survive and thrive under authoritarian conditions. So qualitative approaches allow us to get down to that deeper level of beliefs and meanings. As I said, the weak resist through dissimulation. Therefore, they act one way but think another way. Their true beliefs are very different to how they may act. Foot dragging, false compliance, meaning they say, this is all the different kind of their tactics of resisting. False compliance, feigning ignorance, and the symbolic levels of the practice of ridicule, slander. This is in their own private time, whereas they do not confront authority head on, but they obliquely attack authority and those who suppress them through things such as ridicule, slander, satire, and what you call it, songs, theater, these sorts of things, jokes, is a way of undermining authority at a very personal level. When the powerful monopolize the means of coercive force, direct confrontation, not an option chosen by the weak. However, the apparent silence of the weak is often misunderstood as acquiescence. And it's this silence that qualitative research allows us to overcome, and that we spend time with research participants to try to really understand what's taking place. So for this approach, researchers need to look and listen harder for the micro manifestations of insubordination or evasions of the weak. And Scott makes an example here. He says, during the French Revolution, the French peasantry who would burn down the chateaus and palaces of the aristocracy and destroy the abbeys and cathedrals of the religious in 1789. A year earlier, they would have presented to their bishops and to their kings and princes as being very humble and passive and being perfectly, allegiant retainers of the kings and lords. But what they were harboring inside was very different. And then a year later, that exploded. And of course, the idea that 1 year you can be, completely bestowing your allegiance to the monarchs, and the next year you're burning down the palace. Again, this is what happens when silence is kept inside, and there's a public persona and a personal interior. So research needs to be able to identify the on-stage public behaviors of the apparent submission. Okay, this is what Scott talks about. He says even feigning acts of stupidity is a way of overcoming power, but it's nothing more than a pose. This idea that people don't understand things, or they don't comply completely because they may not understand. He says this is often a pose as a way of not complying completely with authority. Control over outward displays of anger and aggression is a coping strategy also for subordinate groups who hide their true feelings beneath public displays of compliance, loyalty. So again, this is the idea that we can get below these public displays of deference and compliance and loyalty to really understand people's true meanings and beliefs through qualitative research. I want to show an example here from Myanmar in the last year or so, almost a year. You can see how what's taking place there. Massive violence, protests savagely suppressed by the authorities, the military authorities in Myanmar. And I follow the Irrawaddy news, and I started to notice these protests that were taking place in Myanmar, and they started to call them silent protests, or the protestless protests, demonstrations. Here are two tweets from different parts of Myanmar describing examples of what I would call and these are two tweets from the Irrawaddy magazine showing examples of what we call silent protests. A silent demonstration against the military regime is where people would come out, put candles, they put plant pots. They'd make these protests where they couldn't be present because they would be killed, but they would still mark their demonstration, their resistance to the military by their absence, by putting something in the place of themselves. And I saw this same approach to authority in Cambodia as well. And the French philosopher Albert Camus once said, silence is not a negative position. Silence is a tactic. And I call this the practice of active silence. That just because you remain silent in a particular situation doesn't mean you're not active. Doesn't mean your thoughts, emotions, your brain isn't working. Outwardly, you're silent. Inwardly, you are very active. So I call this active silence. And again, it's not a negative position. Where people may look like nothing is taking place, much is taking place, but just the opportunity to express that is not opportune. But again, like Scott said about the year before the French Revolution, those peasants and farmers and the people, on the streets, they may have looked like they were completely loyal to the crown. A year later, the exact opposite. Again, what the difference between the interior and the exterior, and why qualitative research is so good to reach down into that interior experience. So my research looked like this. This is kind of how you draw up a conceptual map of a research design, where you pull together, how you're going to approach your research, what forms of analysis you're going to use, what theory you're going to employ, and what results you hope to come to. I'm not going to dwell too much on that because that's my own research, but just get an idea conceptually the different pieces fit together, and your qualitative research methods must fit into the overall plan of your research. So it's good to develop conceptual maps such as this, so you understand how each part of your research will come to the conclusion that you want to come to. So this is what I did. And then I'll show you what I did because I want to explain the value of triangulation in qualitative research. If any of you are thinking of taking on qualitative research as an approach, arguing that your research, that your methods triangulate to form your outcomes, your results, or your insights is a very good defense of your research. This is what I did. I conducted 60 in-depth interviews. I then employed this diary exercise, and I call it a media diary exercise. And I'm going to discuss the diary a little bit further on because it's a good method. Also conduct this 6-person focus group discussion. And I analyzed the Facebook posts of 4 political leaders over a period of time. And that was qualitatively analyzed. So, to extend the range of research insights through a combination of methods, the process of triangulation aspires to a broader, deeper, more comprehensive understanding of what is studied, where different constructions of phenomenon add to the elucidation of phenomena from different perspectives. Therefore, by taking 3 different methods or 4 different methods and cross-checking the findings from each, your argument, your findings become much more valid and much more, solid in your own mind and also in the mind of people who are assessing your research. So triangulation methods. So Keating, Delaporte and Keating, they talk about triangulation being a synthesis of multiple perspectives where there's a cross-fertilization of the data. And they argue for triangulation as a way, through various methods and methodologies in social science. Flick speaks of triangulation of different methods as a means to both extend knowledge of a subject and to obtain, this is important, mutually assessing results. Therefore, the results of your interview, they mutually support and also assess the results of your focus group or the result of your diary exercise. Cognizant that such triangulation methods bolsters the validity of research and findings if similar trends and themes emerge within data from different sources. So that's what you're really looking for. You're looking for, does the same data, does the same themes, do they emerge from the different methods you're employing? So again, in-depth interviews, media diaries, and the focus group discussion, as well as the analysis of social media posts, were triangulated together to come up with my results. Flick advised that triangulation of different methods should identify perspectives at different levels, from the essential and personal level to the structural aspects of an issue or problem. So this is that your triangulation of methods should also touch on different levels of understanding and analysis. So kind of going from the meta to the micro, and on the way there through the meso. So macro, meso, micro, and that's what my approach was. What I was trying to do in my triangulation methods. So to achieve the qualitative research goal of an insider understanding of the world of social phenomena, there should be, Flick advises 3 levels of qualitative analysis. The first level, analysis of experience, and the analysis of experience is conducted through talking to people, and that's the interviewing process, the method of interviewing. The second level, analysis of interactions and communication. This is what you will get through the focus group discussion. In a focus group discussion, people are not just talking to you as the mediator of the discussion, but they talk to each other. And it's their discussions among themselves that are most valuable in the focus group discussion, I found. Also, on this level of interaction and communication, the diary method is extremely valuable and important because this is self-reported. People keep diaries of their own actions, and they then self-analyze their own actions too. So again, this is on the level of their own interactions themselves. You're getting information from your participants without your presence. Because often your presence in an interview, it can influence ways in which data is received to you. Therefore, by being absent and allowing the people to self-record, you get a different level of data as well. And then the third level was analysis of documents, my third level, and this is the third level that Flick talks about. And this, I looked at the public posts of these 4 politicians in Cambodia, tried to understand what their main themes of communication were. And again, this correlates with the analysis of documentation that Flick talks about. Again, this idea, through your qualitative design, you're going from micro, the middle level, meso, to macro. So in this way, in-depth interviews constitute the essential and personal level of inquiry, the micro. The diary exercise, this also constitutes a personal level of understanding, though recounted from the perspective of the diary keepers themselves. It's self-reported. I wasn't there. They kept diaries themselves, So it's a different form of qualitative, a different form of qualitative data. Then the focus group discussion constitutes a level above the personal, and the participants discussed issues in a group setting where meaning was negotiated. And this is very important in a focus group discussion. People disagree with each other in a focus group discussion and agree with each other. There's negotiation taking place. And then there is a kind of a group, and this is to record this is very interesting because there's great insights come from those discussions and arguments and conclusions and negotiations. And then it goes at the macro level, the analysis of social media activity, that kind of equated to a structural level of investigation, which is what you would get from documents, official documents, reports, these sorts of things. And again, let's talk about interviewing. This Cavalli describes the interview as facilitating the gathering of rich description of the life worlds of the interviewee with the intention of interpreting the meaning and of describing phenomena. Interviews provide insight into the dramatist persona on the stage of life. This is, you're really getting into, by interviewing people, you get really deep understanding of their opinions and beliefs and actions, why they may have done certain things and how they thought, what they thought about it when they were doing it, or what they understand of a particular situation. So there's just the graph is just the number of interviews I did and the breakdown between men and women. And of course, you're always trying to go for gender parity, depending, of course, on what your research focus is. And of course, your sampling also is very important. The sampling, has such an influence on your results. So you really want to have a broad, your sample. It can be purposive, as in my case, because I wanted people who use social media. I didn't want a broad swathe of the population that didn't use social media. I wanted people who use social media. Because from those people, with purposive sampling, you get this, what they call your rich information, because these are people who are involved in the area that you're studying. They're not people who are not involved. So my sample, I did my research in 5 different locations in Cambodia. To give it kind of to give a broad geographic, to give my sample, it be representative geographically as well as, in all other areas as well. And my interviews, I had 2 levels of interviews as well. I had kind of elite interviews, which are critical figures, and then I had everyday people as well. So we're getting 2 levels of understanding. And I suppose you're always aiming for this as well in your qualitative research, that idea of trying to get different levels and different perspectives. And I also use a snowball sampling method, and this is described by Bernanke and Waldorf, describe the process of, they call it chain referral. And it's particularly suited to research involving sensitive issues and where insider knowledge is required to locate specific individuals in hard to reach groups. Cohen and Orelli extend the value of snowball sampling from hard to reach groups to environments beset by conflict, when in some respects the entire population is marginalized to a degree and difficult to access by an outside researcher. And now I want to focus on diary keeping, because I think you're probably all very familiar with interviewing. Maybe diary keeping is less well used. Diary keeping as a methodological approach was employed, I used in 2018, because I wanted to do something that complemented my interviews and the focus group discussion. I wanted something on a different level, where I wasn't involved. I wanted to hear from my research participants themselves. And there's a great tradition of the diary method that goes back to the 1920s. And Berg and Duvel talk about the diary method because as I said, it involves participants self-recording their thoughts and practices over a defined period, and they reflect on those activities, and then they share the result with you. And again, it's kind of the diary kept by individuals, them self-reporting on what they're doing, gives an ethnographic perspective. And I used Duvel and Berg and Duvel describe it as these expressive narratives which allow for rich insights and reflexivity in a particular period of time. And you can have different forms of a diary. You can have a very structured diary where you list out the questions you want each of your diary participants to answer each day and what you want them to record. Or you can have unstructured diary formats where they can really write whatever they want to write about, on particular days or whatever period of time it is. I actually use a semi-structured diary format, and where I had certain questions that I wanted my research participants to answer every day, to record what they did every day. And then there was a section, this is the unstructured section, where they were allowed to reflect on what they had done that day. Now, I was specifically interested in how they had used social media. So they would record what device they'd used and what they'd done on that device each day. And then they would have a section at the end, which was the unstructured section, reflecting on what they felt about their use of social media that day. So you had that structured and unstructured approach to it. And then again, this from education to psychology, medicine, economics, business, the diary format really works because you're actually able to ask people about, a particular phenomenon. They can address it each day, and collecting really rich data that they then send back to you over whatever period of time you're collecting it. Now, my diary was just for 1 week, but it was quite detailed in the questions I asked them for each of those 7 days. But what came back was very insightful. And I think what's important about the diary method here is what I talk about, the researcher absent method, okay? Because in interviewing in the focus group, the researcher is present, okay? And that's all well and good. But there's also times when you're absent, when you're not there, and when research participants are on their own, they can reflect more deeply and probably more honestly as well about a scenario or a situation or a belief or a feeling. So diary as a research absent method encourages personally styled, self-analytical, informal recordings of thoughts and actions. That's just my sample of people who are involved in my diary exercise. And I chose people from 5 different provinces. You can see the breakdown between males and females. You can see the age ranges there as well. And this is what comes back from media diary exercise. You're actually able to code the findings in your media diary exercise. And it gives you very interesting insights. So as you can see here, I really wanted to know from my diary participants, what was the most interesting topic on Facebook during the week in which they kept their diary? And you can see down at the very end, the most interesting topic for my diary participants, which I believe was 32, were social issues. That's what they're most interested in. When they went to social media, went to Facebook, the topics interested were those issues that relate to social issues, domestic violence, poverty, these sorts of things, right? Second to, of course, entertainment, which kind of stands up. We like social media because it's entertaining. And then I asked about most sources of news. And just showing this sort of data comes from the diary exercise and it's very valuable. So I'm a huge fan of diary as a method of research. I want to show you some more. This is more details on why, the idea of autobiographies, journals, memoirs, and other literary forms. The diary can be assigned to self-narratives, which have the power to bring the self to the surface in objective description, analysis, or interpretation. Qualitative media diary enables us to acquire in-depth data, descriptions, enrich context information across the vast bandwidth of devices. So this idea that the diary is a mirror of the soul. And here's some examples of structured, semi-structured design formats. You can see the date, the time, the duration, the content, the location. And this is very structured forms of media diaries. Mine wasn't as structured as that. And here's less. These are semi-structured. So you can put in the day, the communication, again, you can design your own format of your diary based on what you want to know. If it's psychology, if it's education, what books were they reading? Was books? Were they watching TV? It can be applied across all real areas. The thing about a diary is that there can be mixed results from diaries. Some people are very good at keeping diaries. Some people are not so good at keeping diaries. So you really need to test pilot the design and your questions before you send out a diary. you need to, again, you should adjust the design. If you're piloting your diary design and people are finding it complicated, you really have to adjust the design that suits your people involved in the test.
Sorry for interrupting, Dr.
Yes.
Doyle. You have 5 minutes to complete the presentations.
Fabulous. I'll zip through it.
Sorry.
No problem at all. I do have a tendency to go on a little bit, but I'm a huge fan of the diary exercise based on the results that I got from it. And when it comes to visualizing, I think people like these sorts of things in the research. Here's what I was able to do with some of the responses that came in the diaries. So you can see the times on the left-hand side. So we asked people, during the day, when did you use your phone? So they would you were able to find out when they used, and so we had here's the times on the right-hand side. We got phone, tablet, laptop, TV, console, that's your games console or other. And you can see the phone was the most used. And it's used midday and for morning time. It's actually generally phones are, there's use kind of throughout the day. Interesting, you see up here, and this makes sense, from 8 to 10 p.m. in purple, people turn on TVs, when they're not on their phones, when they're at home watching a TV. So just this sort of data is quite, and again, another way of visualizing it over here. So if you're interested in having that in your research, data, the diary exercise is good for this sort of data, again, and particularly in qualitative research, where we use the words and thoughts and ideas of our interviewees to be able to break up your research with, quick insights like this is helpful too. Again, just some simple visualization using Excel based on what I got from the data. The focus group discussion, excellent form of another level of research in triangulation. And you can read there for yourselves and read it all out for you. Again, the idea that the focus group discussion is different to the interview, it's different to the diary. It's where, and particularly in the focus group discussion, it's where people negotiate and argue or agree in a group together about the question you've put out there. It's not that you've just gotten 5 people and you're doing kind of a big interview. What you want is to encourage the focus group participants to discuss among themselves, and they'll do it naturally anyway. You don't actually have to really encourage it too far, because people within a group discussion will kind of challenge each other. And again, the data that comes from the focus group discussion is different to the data in an interview, different to the diary data again. And then the document. This is the idea. We go one level above all of this, and that's where we use, we take from documents the artifacts of life that are natural occurring, that are out there. And I refer to Facebook as offering cultural fragments. Ditchfield and Meredith note the research value of Facebook in terms of the platform providing a preserved archive of naturally occurring data that exists, again, independent of the researcher. Braun and Clark describe this as, Flick describes documents as containing traces that allow us to make sense of cultures. So when I looked at the Facebook activity of these political leaders, I was then able to code the Facebook activity under themes, and you can see how I was able to then just use Excel to represent that also. And I'll actually just wrap up a little bit earlier. So this is really what my research was about: making authoritarianism, my PhD research, likable. Social media, symbolic capital, and regime resilience in Cambodia. And so my focus was to understand the meanings associated with social media use, the agency attributed to network digital platforms, both real and imagined, and the adaptive strategies of authoritarian actors when their power is challenged by new information and communication technology. Okay, that was my research. I wasn't a computer scientist, and I think that the findings that came from those 4 qualitative methods to understand how a technology is used and its role in the political process in an authoritarian country, I think the qualitative approach really worked. The qualitative approach was most appropriate because in that authoritarian context, people are distrustful. So to get honest answers, you have to spend time. You have to, design your research that's most appropriate to that context. And I think by using those 3 qualitative methods, the focus group, the diary, interview, which offered 3 different levels of data, I really got what was important. The data and understandings, and I think my findings at the very end are very valuable for understanding this intersection between how people use technology, the meaning of that technology, and what both mean inside, the workings of a political system in a particular country. So I'm going to wrap it up right there. I'm going to stop sharing this screen. And I hope you found that somewhat interesting, and hopefully it'll give you some ideas for yourselves if you want to take on using qualitative methods. Again, I'm using it in terms of understanding the technology. This can be used to understand, in the sphere of education. It's used in psychology all the time. It's used by, in medicine as well, to understand, say something as, understanding pain among patients, how they experience pain, and things like that, which are very hard to quantify, and what brings on, certain experiences and feelings.
Thank you very much. Very interesting and insightful presentations. Unfortunately, we have so little time for discussions and also for the questions. Actually, we have a lot of questions here. Hopefully 10 minutes would be enough to answer all the questions. The first, I guess, and the second, third, I guess, the first and the second questions is related with data collections. The first question is about when is enough for data collections in qualitative research?
So that's a brilliant question. That's like asking how long is a piece of rope, right? Yeah. Now, it really, really depends on what you're studying. Now, I know of people who've done doctoral research interviewing 6 people, Now, but if your sample is going to be that small, you have to be going very deep into your analysis and your approach to that research. But these could be really, I don't want to go into too much details about this, but they were 6 very unique people in a unique circumstance. So the sample of 6 was acceptable in qualitative research. And then it's most about the depth of your analysis, depth that you go with your research, and the findings from your analysis that come from that. So again, the idea of sample, the greater the size doesn't provide more legitimacy in qualitative research. The sample can be quite small. It's more about the results that you get from your research that's more important than size. I suppose with my own research, you might say, I did 60 interviews. I did 60 interviews because I had 2 fieldwork periods of 2 months each. So I was able to interview over 1 month, 1 person a day, and the second month, 1 person a day. So that's why I came to 60 interviewees. So it wasn't, I was trying to hit 50 or trying to hit 60. It was just that's what worked for me,
Okay, and earlier in your presentations regarding the sampling, you also mentioned about snowballing technique.
Snowball sampling, right? Yes, yeah. It's called that kind of chain referral, which is very important as well. And particularly, I see a question there about, how, in the context of Cambodia, this is very important because people, the research was not very friendly. Again, people have to trust you, and particularly in snowball sampling is where you make contact with one person. They then refer you on to someone else who they believe would be valuable to your research. And then they refer you on to someone else. And and then it builds up a momentum of its own. And you begin to know different people through these different contexts. And this then builds up your sample. And, if you're talking to one person, say about, okay, here's a good example I know of, say drug addiction and drug use. If you talk to one drug user, they will know other drug users, and they also have the value of being able to make that introduction. These hard to reach groups, these people, that other groups that you may never have access to, other than through the snowball sampling process.
Okay. Yeah. So personal contact is also important in building a rapport with the participants.
Oh, absolutely.
To get access. Yeah. Okay, and then the next question is. Do we need to interview all participants, or can we choose several numbers of participants? I guess that has been answered yet by.
It's the same thing about sample size. Now, Now, I suppose when it comes to that, you can't be, if you have interviewed people, you don't want to be too selective, you know? You don't want to just interview people that agree with a particular point of view. The whole idea about qualitative research is that you want to have, you know, the, what do you call it? The agreement and the disagreement, because, you know, it's not like you're trying to add up to a particular conclusion. You want to build in that ambiguity and the tension and the contradictions, because in the you may have one person that contradicts the other 9, and that one person, that one interviewee may be more valuable than the other 9 people who are all agreeing with each other or have one particular point of view, you know? So again, that question is more about the sample size, but there's also a kind of an important ethical issue there as well. You don't want people just agreeing with one perspective. If you have the outlier can in fact be more important than the other 9 that agree with each other, because qualitative is not about numbers. It's about the quality of the data that you're finding.
Okay, so that's the highlight. Yeah, qualitative is not about number, but the quality, right? Okay, yes. Okay. Next questions come from Lely Nur Ria. What is the distinctions of descriptive phenomenology and IPA, or interpretive phenomenological analysis?
To be honest, you know, my whole area isn't, you know, just qualitative research.
These were conceptual.
These are both very similar schools of qualitative research, and I think there's very little in the difference. It's like what's critical discourse analysis and discourse analysis. There are subtle differences, but not a huge amount. And again, this is all in the area of phenomenology. So you could probably get that in the Sage Handbook of Qualitative Research. Will have a great definition of the distinction between both. You know.
Okay. Next, from Ibu Endang from UNS. How is a semi-structured diary look like? Do we tell the participants the points or aspects that they have to write in the diary?
Yes, the difference between the structured one is very structured. You know, my format, I designed it using a Word document with, you know, with columns and where people could fill in and times, you know. So the time of the day I wanted like between 8 a.m. and lunchtime, what they should, you know, I'd have the questions, what did you use? What did you do? And they'd fill that in. So that's kind of a structured one. Semi-structured would just, you could ask them, you know, Monday, so they could, you know, just write something for what you did on Monday, as against where I wanted to break it down by hours, you know, 8 to 12, 12 to 2, 2 to 4. That's very structured versus semi-structured. So it's really up to you how you design it, you know, and the most important thing is that people understand it. And then when you pilot test it, that they're able to, you know, to fill it in and complete it.
Okay, next. Yeah, I guess it answered the questions.
With a logbook, is that the next question?
Yeah. Logbook question. Okay, we can go to the next questions because we have long list of questions right here. How do we triangulate data from self-reported diary then?
Well, the idea of triangulation is that we're triangulating the data that we're finding in one method, such as the diary, with what we're finding in the interviews. So what I was doing is I was looking at themes. Okay, what was coming when it came to the use of social media? What themes were emerging in the diaries? Were they similar or different to themes in the interviews? And that's where the triangulation starts, you know? And what I was finding is that there were similarities in what people were saying in their diaries in terms of how they use social media, with what people were saying in the interviews in terms of social media, but a little bit different, you know? So that's how you triangulate. And then you look at the focus group. What happened in the focus group? Were they saying the same things or different things, you know? And it's the points of similarity and difference is where the real value is in the findings, you know? And of course, you know, if all 3 groups are saying basically the same thing, well, then, you know, there's a certain validity to that. And if, you know, if certain differences are appearing as well, then you should look deeper into those differences across the different, and that's what the triangulation helps.
Okay.
As against just doing 100 interviews or 200 interviews, you know, it's just a kind of adding validity to your approach to research. Okay,
thank you. And so I guess a semi-structured diary, is it similar to logbook?
Well, the logbook is what I think was what a researcher keeps. That's what I'm aware of. Okay. You know, you keep a logbook. Possibly it could be. I think just the diary is about the format, the design,
formatting system.
I mean, if your logbook is, I mean, if you want people to log what they do, yes, it just depends on the design. I suppose a different way to describing it. Maybe a logbook is a different word for diary. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Now okay, wait, do we still have? Okay. Any questions from the participants? Any participant who would like to ask the questions directly to Dr. Doyle? Any questions? Okay, if there's no questions, I guess that's the end of our discussion for today. Thank you very much. Actually, we are still expecting for more elaborations on this, Dr. Doyle. It's a very interesting discussion. And okay, as a token of appreciations from International Office of Untirta or Pelilta, would like to handing over the digital certificate for you. It's the digital certificate, and Dr. Udi will send the soft file to you.
Sure, will do.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kevin. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Bu Dina, we see here Bu Vera Symasi is also joining, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And she'll be our next
speakers for the second series.
Tutor.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me and my few insights into qualitative research, how I did it. So I really appreciate the time to talk to you, and good luck, everyone, in your own research and study.
Okay, thank you very much. And hopefully this token of appreciations mark our collaborations between Pelilta and you, Dr. Doyle, and also your university.
So sure, very much appreciated.
Okay,
thank you.
I'll
I'll say goodbye to you now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. And to close our session for today, actually it's not a summary or a closing up sessions, but research is a quest, an attempt to understand the complex world as we live in. Qualitative research is not just a body of knowledge. It demands a concentrated engagement with the participant to understand the realities, of people's behavior, their beliefs, and also the environment. So there are a lot of things for us to explore more about qualitative research. Please mark your calendar for our next series on the 21st and 28th of October at the same time. Okay, thank you very much for all the participants for attending the first series of short course series held by Pelilta. I'll see you next week. Bye. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Bu Dina. Thank you so
Bu
much.
Dina. Thank you all
everyone.
participants.
Thank you so much.